I did just write this page just to get my thoughts down
Hmm.
on like overarching, is that the right word? Themes of like Freud's interpretations and Lacan's interpretations. So it would be really helpful, yeah, if I could just like read this out and see what you think. And then maybe if I've just said it out loud, we can use it to frame us going through the last part,
Yeah,
maybe.
perfect. Oh, I like that.
Okay, good. And yeah, this I just did it really quickly today, so it is not exhaustive, but it was the Lacan part is all from memory, and the Freud part is mostly from his formulation. Um, okay, so I feel like Freud, and it makes sense historically, has like a more straightforward Oedipal interpretation of little hands.
Hmm.
So the need for mother causes hatred of the father, and he emphasizes that this creates a conflict for little hands because he can't just hate his father and remove his father because he actually loves his father.
Hmm.
Um, in regards to the horse, I feel like Freud sees the horse mostly as representing the father.
Hmm.
The fall of the horse is kind of the wish for the father to die so that Hans can have his mother to himself. But of course, the fear, the phobia, maybe, the fear of the horse is this dilemma that Hans does not want to kill his father because he loves him. Um, so he wants the mother, but he doesn't understand how the father has her or what role the father has in childbearing. And then this is what Freud says. He knows it involves the whittler and maybe a row with the feet. I thought this was interesting that Freud alluded to, but didn't like press on this interpretation of the row with the feet might actually mean like represent Hans seeing his parents have sex. And so then obviously Hans knows like, hey, this is the thing that happens. This must be related to the childbearing. Um, but he's not sure.
Hmm.
And the big problem here in Hans trying to figure this out is he does not know of the existence of a vagina. He only knows about Widler's. And then his insistence on his mother having Widler stops him from being able to answer this question of how babies are being made. But he figures it out himself. We can see this through the doll when he lets the knife drop out through the doll. And Freud also says the Borer fantasy. So, this fantasy where Lil Hans has like a drill bored into his stomach. Maybe
Hmm.
this is Lil Hans figuring it out. Um, so the last part of Freud, so Freud, in terms of what does the phobia do, Freud says two conflicting things. He says maybe the phobia restricts his movement and therefore stops Hans from fulfilling this wish of obtaining the mother. Or he says because the phobia stops him from going outside, it keeps him indoors with the mother. So that part I was a little bit confused. I think staying at home with his mother is the simplest explanation rather than restricting his movement. Um, and then the final solution, Hans has children with, in a fantasy, Hans has children with his mother. And he has this really clever way of getting around not killing his father by pairing his father off with his own mother, with Hans' grandma.
Hmm.
So, like, just saying all of that stuff again, but like contrasting it with what Lacan says. Um, so, I think Freud focuses on the dad, whereas I think Lacan focuses on the mum, on this kind of overwhelming and signifier creating world of the mother. And Lacan has like a broader sense of what the horse represents. Can be the mother, can be Hans, can be the father. Um, but to me, or maybe just the things that I picked up on in Lacan, it does feel like there's this emphasis that, you know, the mother is this cart bearer, pregnant person who can fall and can make Hans fall alongside her, make his world of signifiers fall, feels like he can be taken off at any time by the mother. and he wishes to escape this like all-encompassing maternal circuit. And he compels his father to show him the way. He wishes his father would like assert authority to allow him to separate from the mother, but the lack of the father's authority, the lack of fear for the father, means that he has to bring this horse as a stand-in for the father. So he fears the horse instead of the father. And so there's this whole new different element of Lacan talking about the imaginary maternal phallus. I feel like Hans is obsessed with this. Maybe this is too much my interpretation. It's like trying to locate the source of his mother's power so he can like replicate it himself. And yeah, whereas Freud obviously doesn't talk about this at all. And instead, I think the obsession of the Buddha is just trying to understand sex, really. And so the interpretation of the phobia is really different. So, as I said, Freud thinks the phobia maybe just keeps Hans at home with his mother and allows him to have his wish fulfilled. Whereas I like Lacan when he says that the phobia structures Hans' environment rather than Freud thinking it kind of restricts his environment. Lacan is saying that, this environment has been brought into chaos since this separation from the mother has been raised as a possibility. And so the phobia structures and gives him some kind of control in a world where he feels like he has none. And the solution, I think they both point to the similar solution, that Hans has children. Freud, I think, is so much simpler. Just, in the fantasy, Hans has children with his mother. Whereas Lacan instead is talking about like this situational position that Hans takes. He takes up the maternal position because he was never really explained what the paternal position is. And I think both Freud and Lacan agree that if they could have improved on the case, it would be to explain to him not only the existence of the vagina, but the role of the father in sex, in childbearing. And so I feel like that's kind of where they meet, but Lacan emphasizes maybe that he can't take up this more paternal position, and so instead, like in a Lacanian interpretation, Hans takes up the maternal position, and almost has the phallus through his children, instead of having the phallus for another woman. Having. And Lacan also says that evidence for this, like possessing the phallus through your children, is his bond with his sister. When Freud meets little Hans later on, he seems to be close to his sister. The only part I don't understand, so I do think the Freud solution, Hans solution of, okay, I don't want to kill my father, how can I get rid of him? He can be with his own mother. That makes more sense. I can't really remember what Lacan was saying about doubling the mother. I think Lacan was also talking about this. But that part, I'm not sure.
Okay. First of all, that was a very good recollection. I think I have by now a bit of an idea of what Lacan means with the redoubling of the mother. Actually, maybe I don't really, but sort of I have an interpretation of it. So we can talk about that when we look at this last bit of the text.
And I also know, I didn't say anything about eating and shitting. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean the eating and the shitting isn't that emphasized by either Freud or Lacan. I'm not sure how important it is. For me, sort of the eating and the shitting is just like a representation for the fact, or like it really shows us the fact sort of that Hans is really focusing a lot on the where does the babies come from part of sort of this problem, where sort of in Freud's notion, it is sort of all about the Whittler. It is all sort of, it is, he says at some point, which I do agree with, but I think he says it a bit too strongly, sort of that there is a condensation between sort of the question of the Whittler and the question of where do babies come from. And sort of he says, well, sort of the question of the Whittler can only be solved when the question of where do babies come from is posed. And sort of there's a condensation between sort of these two things. For Lacan, it is very much sort of this taking up the question of like, or like also sort of this interposing of these two questions of like Hans sort of imagining his own children, and sort of in imagining sort of these own children, he's sort of imagining sort of, I guess, sort of in being in possession of the imaginary phallus. Sort of this is a bit, if I, this, yeah, Lacan would probably say it much more eloquently than this, but sort of, yeah, sort of this is, I guess, part of what Lacan's reading is. Maybe we can just like go into the text and see what Hans himself is saying. So on April 21st, we have these nice thoughts or fantasies of Hans. And the first one is Lacan really, this is where I really like, this is sort of, I think I would never have found this without Lacan, without Sigmund Freud, sort of this realizing how like the Hans is sort of riding on two trains at the same time. I think sort of this also at this stage makes a lot of sense, because the last time we were talking a lot about sort of how Hans is really ambivalent towards sort of the fetish object, and sort of really ambivalent towards a lot of things, like literally sort of saying, well, shit is black and white, or black or white, and sort of constantly like contradicting himself. And like Freud reads that as, well, he's making fun of the father oftentimes. I don't really remember how Lacan reads this. I think he kind of agrees with Freud. He also says like sort of that Hans is sort of calling up upon the father to like be a proper father, be like be a real father, and like something like this. I think sort of this is sort of my reading more, is that Hans is really trying to like figure something out that sort of actually is kind of contradictory, and sort of his speech becomes contradictory because he's concerned with the contradictory problem. And sort of this train station thing really sort of nicely captures this ambivalence or contradictoriness in Hans' speech and in Hans' sort of thinking that we've sort of seen very much at the like, yeah, at the second third of this text. Here the fantasy goes, and Hans says, there was a train at Lines, and I traveled with my Lines grandmummy to the Hauptzollamt station. You hadn't got down from the bridge yet, and the second train was already at Sankt Veit. When you came down, the train was already there and we got in. So it's very interesting sort of that Hans first gets on the train, which his father misses with the grandma. And then sort of he picks up the dad at a later station, but sort of gets in with the dad in the later station. So like he literally gets on the same train twice, which is sort of a really contradictory fantasy, but sort of I think in this contradictoriness it really captures sort of the contradictoriness, or maybe just ambivalence, that sort of Hans finds himself in the whole time in relation to well, mostly in relation to the Whittler. It's like he knows it's not there, but sort of how, if it's sort of not there, where do babies come from? He's constantly like, saying these things like, well, my mommy was quite naked in her chemise. Sort of, there's a contradictory statement in a sense. Like and this sort of the father constantly calls out his contradictoriness without realizing how that sort of is phantasmatically relevant. When he says, well, your mom can only be naked or in her chemise. Yes, so sort of this is the train fantasy, and after that we have this. I'm not super sure what to make of this, but we have sort of some aggression from Hans towards the father, where sort of on the previous day Hans was sort of showed some aggression towards the mother and sort of all this whipping fantasy of the horse, and then the dad eventually asks him like, who do you actually want to whip, me, Hannah, or mommy? And Hans says, I want to whip mommy. Now here we have sort of some aggression towards the dad, where Hans says, you've got to be naked and knock up against a stone and bleed, and then I'll be alone with mommy for a little bit at all events. When you come into our flat, I'll be able to run away quick so you don't see. So there's some sort of Hans sort of saying like the dad should be naked and like knock up against a stone and bleed, like his friend Fritzl who knocked up his foot. Yeah, and then sort of the dad asks him, when Fritzl fell down, what did you think? And Hans says that you should hit the stone and tumble down. And then afterwards, sort of, or like not afterwards, but sort of really in the same conversation, I'm just going to continue reading. The dad says, so he'd like to go to mommy. Hans says, yes. The dad says, what do I really scold you for? And Hans says, I don't know, which is really true. Like he really sort of doesn't know what the father sort of really wants. The father always only tells him that he isn't mad at him, that he doesn't want to harm him, is no threat to him. And like then sort of why, sort of Hans like really emphasizing, well, I don't know what you really want, is sort of it makes sense. The dad says, why? And then Hans says, because you're cross. And the dad says, that's not true. Again, sort of always saying, no, I'm not actually mad, whatever. And Hans says, yes, it is true. You're cross. I know you are. It must be true. And sort of Lacan's interpretation of this is like very much sort of Hans sort of calling upon the dad to play his role sort of as father, as sort of authority, as you like said before. I'm a bit skeptical, but I'm not sure how to really deal with this.
As in whether you want to take on Freud or Lacan's interpretation. Like, does he fear the father or not?
Yeah.
Freud thinks he does, Lacan thinks he doesn't.
Yeah. I sort of here see more a like, you should get hurt. You should bleed. I don't know if that's the same thing sort of as saying like you should like put your foot down. Hey,
that's good. In like a supporting Lacan kind of way, like I need you to assert your authority, put your foot down.
Yeah, sort of that sort of would be the connection. Maybe I do kind of also think that, but I'm not sure to really. I think in this case I kind of agree more with Freud when he writes here that's sort of at the end of they April 21st. He says, speaking with the air of superiority, which is so easily acquired after the event, we may correct Hans' father and explain that the boy's wish to tease the horse had two constituents. It was compounded of an obscure sadistic desire for his mother and a clear impulse for revenge against his father. The latter could not be reproduced until the former had come to emerge in connection with the pregnancy complex. And then he says, we'll sort of here, this is the condensation of like pregnancy complex and like Oedipal complex or like phallic complex, whatever. Yeah. So these are maybe we can I can leave it at that, because I think both readings are actually not that strange. Like, I think Freud's reading makes sense. I think even though Lacan's reading is different from that, it also makes sense. Like, Hans really saying you're cross, and then the dad saying it's not true, and then Hans saying no, it is true. You're cross. I know you are. It must be true. Like, this is like, even though you tell me you're not jealous, maybe sort of me going into the bed with mommy, like I'm pretty sure you are, and I don't believe you when you say you're not. So there's really, I mean, if someone is maybe putting his foot down, it's Hans in this situation. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's similar. Freud says later on, Hans is frustrated by the dad also because he knows this piece of enlightenment about where babies come from regarding the stork is a lie. And it frustrates Hans because being fed this lie prevents him from actually asking what is the truth. And it's kind of the same, I guess, with this. Maybe Hans does see through it. The father is being a great father, but it would just be so much an easier out if the father could just be angry and then everyone knows, but nothing is ever that simple. So I hope it's not a cop-out, but I guess, yeah, both can kind of be true at the same time. He knows that he can't, Hans knows he can't be with the mother. Hans knows that the father instead takes that place. And it's true. And, the father has been like, oh, stop hugging him in the morning. But then at the same time, he's really good with Hans and doesn't get angry with him. So you can see it is a bit of a confusing situation, which could be simpler. But it's kind of a false simplicity anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we just go to the next next fantasy. Oh, well, the two next fantasies. The first one, I'm again like sort of these first two pages we have, like there's quite some uncertainty for me here. This is sort of the first thing that Hans comes up with on April 22nd. It's again like a thought. He says he thought something, so let's call it a fantasy. He says a street boy was riding on a truck, and the guard came and undressed the boy quite naked and made him stand there till next morning. And in the morning, the boy gave the guard 50,000 florins so that he could go on riding on the truck. I think sort of, again, there are a couple of things that I think are interesting in this fantasy. So first of all, we again find someone being paid with a excessive amount of money, which I think Hans sort of did in a fantasy twice before. I think he paid the stork to not bring children anymore.
Yep.
Then sort of he has sort of this fantasy of riding on the truck. So the thing
and the quite naked part as well.
Yeah, the quite naked. I tried to emphasize that one, and I looked at the German. It is the same wording as he uses for quite alone. So that really that's sort of,
that's it.
That's the clue for this fantasy. Because what does quite naked mean? Quite naked means quite alone means I'm alone with mommy, but sort of as sort of the negation of there being other people, sort of as the negation of Hannah in that case. Like we are quite alone. There's only the two of us. Others are excluded. And sort of here, it's like the quite naked, which again sort of gives is an argument actually sort of for Lacan's reading that sort of the nakedness in the first dream or fantasy is actually sort of the father being naked rather than being barefoot. Is naked, sort of, it's like being naked under her chemise, sort of quite naked without sort of the veiling part of something. Yeah. So sort of in a sense, like he's kind of fantasizing of sort of someone being actually sort of so naked that you maybe sort of can see the Whittler in a sense. You know, sort of, he knows there's no Whittler, because he's seen other girls naked before, his little sister naked before. But sort of, maybe what if they're actually like quite naked rather than sort of just naked? And then maybe he is able to, sort of this thing I think is kind of going on there. Right.
Yeah, and I think the money as well, like, because I was like, why the money? But he is constantly thinking, how could he take up the position of the father, bigger, Whittler, spectacles, moustache, and money? I think I remember learning very quickly, like, you're like, money is the source of power, right? You just want loads of money. So
yeah,
maybe
true.
that's the
it
only
is a source
way.
of power. That's a good reading. No, it is a sort of source of power. I think that's and it makes sense to be a source of power because like it's so much, it's just such an okay, like children don't know, but sort of he could say probably I give him $5, which probably at the time was already quite a lot, like more that he could like imagine buying candy with. But he says like 50,000. That's, I don't know, at that time probably could buy like 3 houses from that or whatever.
Maybe that shows how big he thinks this hurdle would be, like to overcome, to actually be with the mum. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, and maybe we just can go to the next fantasy, which I sort of think is the most straightforward one. It's the fantasy of the rubber doll. And yeah, sort of the dad recounts, at lunchtime, I was told that Hans had been playing all the morning with an Indian rubber doll. Is Indian rubber doll like an actual term?
I have never heard it.
Because in the German it just says rubber doll.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Let me Google it. Yeah.
So I thought maybe that sort of Indian rubber doll was a certain term.
No, I've not heard of it. Oh, I guess it's just, dolls when they're made of that kind of plastic, soft plastic. I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay. Yeah, so playing with an Indian rubber doll, which he called Grete. Grete being one of the children he played in Gmunden with.
Oh, yeah.
He had pushed a small penknife in through the opening to which the little tin squeaker had originally been attached and had then torn the doll's legs apart so as to let the knife drop out. He had said to the nursemaid, pointing between the doll's legs, "Look, there's its Whittler." So I think this is very, and Freud also agrees sort of that this is maybe the other way around. I agree with Freud, that sort of this is a, like, kind of a birth scene we have here, where sort of previously sort of this was much more obscure to Hans. We now see sort of, okay, like it's sort of, this is also why I try to emphasize the eating and shitting part, because sort of in this rubber doll fantasy, really like, okay, so where's the squeaker sort of attached? Is attached at the mouth. So there was sort of a part of sort of the doll, sort of that, I don't know, I guess sort of came off, left a hole, and he could like push a knife through that mouth hole, and drop it out in between the legs, sort of where the whittler would be or the ass would be. And sort of I think this sort of and sort of Freud saying, here Hans is telling us sort of his fantasy of childbirth sort of really sort of does, I guess, sort of indicate sort of the whole question of like, before, even with the Bohrer, Freud says, well, maybe we can sort of imagine that as a penis. I don't think sort of we can really. I think the Bohrer is just a tool for opening the stomach. And sort of here he really sort of plays out sort of how like the sort of the childish search, or like how does something get into the stomach and sort of is born from the stomach? Well, it must come in through the mouth and sort of be shed out, or like, yeah.
Yeah, which makes sense. It is super confusing. If you don't know about vaginas, it's either, through the mouth makes sense. I don't know. The boring still could be like, it's in the stomach, so just go through the stomach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah, because this one is weird, because Lacan crosses over to Freud for this one and is like, oh, he's showing to the mum, like it's the mum's knife and she can no longer castrate him with it. That's what Lacan says for this one. So it's kind of strange. They kind of swap places. Whereas, it's clearly a birth to me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, tell me that again, because I don't remember properly.
Yeah, it was really brief, but because he says the knife belongs to mummy, which I believe is true in reality. But yeah, Lacan says that he's kind of has taken the mum's knife, the mother's knife that would be used to castrate him, and is kind of taken ownership of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is so obviously him trying to figure out birth.
Yeah. I think maybe sort of the knife belongs to mommy can just mean like it's a baby, right? It's sort of the baby in mommy.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and sort of the dad and Hans chat about this fantasy, and on page here 71, the dad asks, how do you think chickens are born? And Hans says, the stork just makes them grow. The stork makes chickens grow. No, God does. And then the dad says, I explained to him that chickens lay eggs, and out of the eggs, there come other chickens. And then Hans is sort of laughing and says, I like what you've just told me. And then he says a bunch of random, super funny shit. But sort of we can look at it because it has a lot of meaning, that random shit. But I think this is actually sort of a very crucial moment in this whole case, because the whole time Hans really had only growth as a concept for like things evolving, life getting bigger. Like sort of it starts small and it gets bigger. And here we have sort of a transformation of this concept of growth, where sort of chickens lay eggs, and out of the eggs there come new chickens. So you have some alterity sort of introduced here in this, in what sort of the dad is saying. Sort of it's not just one entity that's now growing, but sort of two entities that sort of grow each other. And I also sort of noted at this point, like, why sort of, even though sort of this is a good sort of comes at sort of at the right time, and is really immediately picked up upon by Hans. Like, why doesn't the dad tell him sort of about like the bees or something? Like, why chicken and egg? That's like why do you give this poor little boy a chicken and egg paradox for childbirth? Why don't you like so I yeah, I guess in German we have a different saying for that, but sort of why doesn't he like tell him about the birds and the bees?
Yes, yeah. It was so embarrassing when I was 7. they bring the chickens and you hatch them. Did you do this in school?
No.
It's very sweet. So yeah, they bring the eggs in an incubator, and then the farmer came in and we got to ask him questions. And my dad, for his job, used to look after chickens, so I really wanted to do a good job. And I put my hand up and I was like, I can't. I asked something like, "Where did the eggs come from?" And he was like, "Chickens." And it was so embarrassing. And I was like, "Why did I ask that question?" But it is like, you're right. He has given a new stage. I really like that. Before, everything existed always and it just grows bigger.
Yeah.
It existed always. But now there is this new mechanism almost for something coming into being.
Yeah.
You're right. And it's chicken and egg though. What comes first? It's a mess. So
yeah. And it will be a mess now for Hans going forward. But sort of it really is like it's a very, very important stage, because like finally some alterities introduced, some becoming, literally, something becoming.
What do you mean by alterity?
This is sort of something that I guess Lacan used this a lot in Seminar 4, like when he says when he's talking about Leonardo da Vinci at the end, he's saying like there isn't like a radical alterity here. Sort of in Leonardo, we don't see sort of a radical alterity in the scientific knowledge. And alterity sort of in the sense of like the other. I mean, sort of the other always transports some alterity. This sort of means when with language, it transports alterity, because we have to use sort of these signifiers that come from somewhere else to articulate something very sort of very close to us. We need to take something very foreign to us, and sort of there's no way of articulating our something that is in us without sort of taking something out, taking something in from the outside. Alterity sort of just in also in the sense of like, you know, little others, big others, they're different from you. They are an alterity to you. And sort of this sort of what I'm saying here, like in the concept of growth, everything just stays the same. There's no alterity. It just grows. But sort of here between chicken and egg, there's a real alterity, like two different kind of things, beings.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then sort of Hans plays with this idea just wildly. Like in a certain sense, I think he kind of doesn't believe the dead. In a certain sense, he does call him stupid. Like he says, yeah, I've seen it happen already. I've seen chicken laying eggs. And then he says, oh no, actually I didn't see chicken laying eggs. I saw you laying an egg. And then the dad says, I didn't lay an egg. And then Hans is like, yeah, I was just making fun. I laid an egg.
I laid an egg yesterday.
Yeah.
And out of it there came a little Hans.
Yeah. Okay, so but here what he says, sort of ingemunden, he says, at Munden I laid down in the grass, and the children didn't look at me, and all at once in the morning I said, look, Fred, children, I laid an egg yesterday. And all at once they looked, and all at once they saw an egg, and out of it there came a little Hans. Well, what are you laughing for? Because the dad obviously also thinks this is very funny. Mom didn't know about it, and Caroline didn't know, because no one's looking on. And all at once I laid an egg, and all at once it was there, really and truly. Dad, why do chickens grow out of eggs? When it's left alone, must it be eaten? Yeah. So first of all, must it be eaten? Okay, nice. Sort of the whole question of like now food, something getting swallowed is coming in again. But I think the other thing is really interesting, how quickly Hans connects this to his experience of little Hannah getting born, because like he said the whole, like even previously he said like nobody saw anything, like the stork came in sort of unannounced, he had a key, nobody saw him, and here again sort of like the children weren't looking, and all at once it was there. Sort of this was his experience, and sort of you can also see sort of the point that is really troubling his mind, like sort of out of the blue, basically, there's another child, there's another baby sister there, like, and then sort of him like from then on, like contemplating, like, where did you really come from? She's now here, obviously, so like there's a cause for concern, but like what happened? Like how did this happen? And sort of this really sort of the birth of the sister really being like a moment of like a starting moment for this whole inquiry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is important. Like, they didn't look, they didn't know. I think he knows as well that, you know, sex is this forbidden thing that you do not look at. Like, something's happened that he hasn't seen, but he also knows you shouldn't look as well.
Yeah, the looking is also connected to the whole like Whittler thing of the mom, right? And like questions of the Whittler, because he was very, very, he was always looking. Then at some point, like he had a compulsion to look. At some point, he says like, "Oh no, I don't want to look," something like this. And now here, sort of, it's the others, sort of also not looking, and then sort of out of the blue, but like not out of the blue, but because sort of somebody laid an egg, like a little Hans appearing. And this sort of also interesting that he says, out of it there came a little Hans. He doesn't say Hannah. So the question of like where did Hannah come from is also like really condensated, or like also like parallel to the question of like where did I come from?
Yes. Yeah, actually that's good, because I always have this feeling, but that's a very deep question. I don't want to put that on Hans. Where am I from? But yeah, maybe that is some evidence that he is ultimately thinking that. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then sort of here also Freud notes, his parents still hesitated to give him the information, which was already long overdue, which is just, yeah, that's just true. Like why, I mean, the dad obviously senses sort of that it's now he should tell something to Hans, but he tells him the story of chicken and the egg and not the story of the birds and the bees.
Yeah. It is very interesting because Hans is very young. I don't have comparisons. I don't really have like young nieces and nephews, but I guess like regardless of the age, like he's very curious, you know. And yeah, it's right there in front of him. So I agree with Freud. Just tell him.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe that sort of is a concern for the parents at that point, because like usually people don't explain this to their children when they're this young. Usually I think they wait till they're like 10 or something like this. Or like,
for me, I would guess like, I don't know why I'm saying this, but 7 or 8, because I feel like that's when there's like a shift. Obviously you can explain it in many, many different forms and in very simplistic forms.
right.
But I think even now, and obviously our times are a lot more liberal in regards to this, but I think people are getting better, but I can really kind of also sympathize that this would have felt very young.
Yeah, no, that's true. But sort of, I think the Freud says is sort of out of the development of the questioning of Hans, because like maybe if your child isn't questioning this or pondering this question as much, maybe you don't really feel sort of a need to tell them. But sort of maybe in this case with little Hans, who's obviously like everything sort of really revolves around this question for him, that maybe here will be. And I mean, sort of it does this teaching about sort of sex does sort of come in different stages. I just remember sort of that we had like in kindergarten, like a picture book for like children, sort of that sort of explained how babies are made, and sort of they put it into a room where only sort of the 5 or 6 years old, 5 or 6 year old sort of went in. Sort of they sort of regulated this. Okay, like children under 5 sort of don't really need to find this, but sort of it is in the room where like the older children sort of play. And then sort of I'm just like talking now about sort of how it is institutionalized in Germany, or like it was for me. so this was sort of the kindergarten experience, and then sort of in school we had that sort of, I guess when I was sort of 10, like we had sort of the real, like with the teacher sort of the one or two like sex ed classes, where sort of, but sort of, I'm just saying like it happened at like different stages, different age adequate sort of stages. And I remember I mean, I still remember like, as children, we would sort of ask these questions always, like even just as young children, we used to like wonder about sex and like what is it, and like stuff like that. What is kissing, whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, you've really broken a memory for me, actually. I had a book as well. I would have been younger than 7, and yeah, it was a cartoon, male figure, female
Yeah,
figure.
yeah, like
Um,
that.
I think it was like a kind of sciencey book, but all I can kind of remember is just staring intently, and you're like, the answer is here.
Yeah.
You're like, this is important. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you are trying to figure it out.
I remember
And
sort
it's
of,
true. Yeah, go on.
no, say it. I was interrupted.
I think also at 10 is when we got told properly in school a bit. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I remember sort of us sort of just like kind of like being sneakily sometimes reading sort of this book. Like we were, at some point I realized like, oh, they put this there. But sort of at that point I thought like, oh, the adults, they don't know it is here. Like we have
Yes, because even though this book was clearly for me, it still felt illicit as well.
Mhm.
You're like, yeah. Yeah, this is kind of what, yeah, you just know that it's kind of not for you. But yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I really remember these pictures. Yeah.
Right. And Hans then sort of goes on to say, this is on page 73,
Mm.
boys have girls and girls have boys. So he really sort of picks up sort of the chicken and egg situation and like projects the sexual difference right onto that. Like, it doesn't super make sense even for him, like he will change it, but sort of this is sort of his explanation of like, well, what is, because he is pondering like what the whole time he's and like we will see this on the next just pages, actually on the right same page here, sort of him pondering like what is, first of all, he is thinking about sort of what do females have, what kind of genitalia when they don't have whittles like I do, but he's also pondering like what is the dad's role in making a baby. So there's a double sort of the double blind spot for him, like he in a certain sense he neither knows how men contribute to the baby, nor he knows how women sort of really sort of give birth to the baby, or like how women contribute to each other baby. He only knows that at some point his little sister was there, and yeah. So, and then he makes up fantasies in order to like explain that and uses all the signifiers he has available.
Yeah, and I think he is so clever at doing it. I think he comes up with really, really cool theories. The doll, the borer, all this chicken stuff. Women have boys, men have girls. Like, I think he's really clever. I like that Freud at the end says like this curiosity is kind of related to intelligence. I think that's quite nice. And because I do think he's done a great job when he has these two huge blind spots. If you don't know the anatomy, you're never really going to figure it out. So yeah.
And sort of on the previous page, on page 72, still just a little remark, like he says again, I should like to have one that is a baby, but mommy mustn't have one. I don't like that. So there's a double message in that is sort of the double message of like, I'm not really happy about sort of having a sister. But I think the more important information here is that he wants the space where babies come from to be closed, because there's a I think as we talked about last time, there's a big fear of like the question around birth and death for him, and sort of the box where babies come from, and sort of I think real real scare, real anxiety about like having to go back into the box. Yeah, and sort of the whole like mommy shouldn't have another baby is, I think this is my interpretation, but sort of him saying, I don't. There should be a lock before the space. I don't want to be like collected back by the stork and sort of go back to the box where children are in.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I think you raise a good point that even though here's me saying, oh, he's very intelligent, like it is anxiety inducing. And I really like what Freud says when he says, I just wish they enlightened him on these few things, then he would have been able to stop asking questions and probably entered, the latency phase. The amnesia kind of sets in again because it's like you figured it out, no more questions, and then you can relax. Because some parts of this actually are scary. Yeah.
So now already still on page 73, the dad tells Hans, boys don't have children, only women, only mummies have children. And then Hans says, but why shouldn't I? And the dad says, because God arranged like that. And Hans says, but why don't you have one? And then he says, you'll have one, you just wait. And sort of here we see again sort of him just having no clue as to what sort of the dad is contributing sort of to the baby. And he says like, well, you should also have one, like in a certain sense again, like saying, and tell me what your role is. And
yes, I think it's true. Yeah. I think that's really important. But why don't you have one? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hans then also says, I belong to you. The dad says, but mommy brought you into the world, so you belong to mommy and me. Hans says, does Hannah belong to me or to mommy? And the dad says to mommy, which Hans takes up upon, like, again, like, babies only come from women. The dad sort of is not included in this picture. I think the dad sort of read it as like, does it come from Hans or mom? And then he says, well, no, it comes from mom, not from you. And then Hans says, no, like, who does she belong to? No, she belongs to me. Why not to me and to mommy? And then Dad says, Hannah belongs to me, mommy, and you. And Hans says, there you are. Like, okay, like finally, finally some sense out of this idiot.
But do you think there's a little bit of Oedipus there? Why not me and mummy?
No, I think it's more like, I think that the more crucial point is like not only to mommy. Like that's the important point. Like I really want babies not to just belong to mommy. And yeah, this is sort of jumping a bit.
But so before you jump though, I do think the April 24th enlightenment is really important, saying children grow inside mummy, he knew that, I think, but are brought into the world by being pressed out like lymph.
Yeah. This is interesting again. No, go on.
It still doesn't explain where they've come from.
Yeah.
So it's still an issue. Yeah. No, maybe this isn't so much of an enlightenment, to be honest. I think he knew this, right?
It is and it isn't. Because in a certain sense, they again don't tell Hans like what the role of the father and all of this is, but sort of he was searching for this to be confirmed the whole time. And they really confirm what he already knows. They say they grow inside their mommy and they are pressed out like a lump. So they really, they're taking up sort of Hans' own explanations and like really affirming. And you see afterwards that the dad says there was a visible improvement in his state. So like, I think this also did something for Hans.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they're using his own terminology. It's nothing he didn't know before, but you still need confirmation. It's still
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
By the way, when do you have to leave? Because I think.
I have to at 4, so we can keep going.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm jumping now. We can see what's in between there, but sort of on page 77, Hans says, I'm not afraid of carriages and pairs of cabs with one horse. I'm afraid of buses and luggage carts, but only when they're loaded up, but not when they're empty. When there's one horse and the cart's loaded full up, then I'm afraid. When there's 2 horses and it's loaded up, then I'm not afraid. So for me, the distinction here between, loaded up, not loaded up, sort of he will confirm very much sort of that this is also now for him has become like a metaphor like for birth, for like the mom being pregnant. And then I think it's maybe I'm overinterpreting this a bit sort of, but I think it's interesting that he says, I'm afraid when there's one horse with a loaded up cart, but I'm not afraid when there's 2 horses with a loaded up cart. So in a sense, like when it's just mommy, I'm scared. But sort of when it's 2 horses, sort of parents, then I'm not scared.
Ooh, this is Lacan, no?
Huh?
Like this sounds like that would fit with Lacan's theory.
Yeah.
The overwhelming mother. I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so maybe one thing that sort of about the mother, I think sort of Hans is really looking for an explanation, for like really trying to make sense of what's going on. And this sense making, this sort of name of the father in a sense that sort of comes in and sort of makes sense of what is going on, that sort of quilts the other's desire. Like this explanation can also just come from the mom. Like sort of, it's not just sort of that, I mean, the whole time sort of here, so well, just sort of the enlightenment we just talked about just now, like this is sort of something that comes from the mom. And I think if the mom had told him sort of not just the confirmation of what he already knew, but sort of really telling him more sort of the thing that sort of the dad sort of doesn't tell him the whole time, I think that would sort of maybe have helped Hans quite a lot. And sort of I'm just trying to say, like, when we say Hans is sort of, afraid of the overbearing mother, also sort of the words of the mother sort of can have an impact on that. It's not just sort of, it's not just the dad that has the ability to provide this, sort of the knowledge that Hans is looking for. I think this is a failure, not just on the dad's part, but on the parents' part.
It's a good point. It really is true. Yeah. It can come from a variety of places. Yeah. You should just be doubling your chances with 2 parents, but it doesn't require to.
Yeah. Yeah. So should I go on, or do you? I'm just like jumping from.
The only other thing here, again, just reasserting that the role of the father, again, is not being told. Just a little bit further on, talking about, Hans is just describing fears that mummy will have another child. Yeah, you don't want mummy to have another baby, Hans. Well, then she won't be loaded up again. Mummy said if mummy didn't want one, God didn't want one either. Why has the mum not mentioned the father? This is insane. Like,
yeah, again, like this is what I'm saying. Like she could just also mention that, like actually, sort of in, just like I don't know, just make it like child adequate. Like if a mommy and a daddy love each other a lot, then sort of they make a baby out of their love or something. But this is not what anyone is saying. They're always just saying the mom makes a baby.
yeah. And I don't know, I do feel this is a complete overinterpretation, but we know they divorce later on. And I think that you're seeing Like both of the dad doesn't talk about the mum doesn't talk about the dad. Like
Oh, that's
they are
interesting.
the
I mean,
way they speak.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what Lacan is saying. Like he's at some point he says, well, maybe Hans senses some they sleep in different beds and sort of yeah. I mean, I'm just saying Hans.
I do they?
Huh? Yeah, they
Do
sleep
they?
in beds. Also, yeah, because the dad at some point says, only boys go into the mommy's bed. Uh, um, daddies sleep in their own bed and don't go into mommy's bed or something like this. At morning.
Mm. Okay.
And then he says, well,
Is the sleeping in separate beds more common in Germany? I think my German friend told me this once. I don't know if she was chatting absolute shit.
I'm not sure if it's more common in Germany. I just think it is a common thing. Like, so maybe
I
it
don't
is
think it's common here.
maybe it is then common in Germany.
No.
I just consider it to, I don't know, if I think of parents of my friends, I think it's around 50-50.
No, it's odd here, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like it fits the very practical. I know people would want it. People would want it.
Okay. That's how it goes.
Yeah.
Just repress your needs.
Because it's all about appearances, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, so on 75, there's the dad asks Hans, what would you do if you were daddy?
On
And
what page?
75.
75?
Uh-huh.
I was backwards.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah.
Yeah, the dad asks, what would you like to be if you were daddy? And Hans says, and if you were Hans, I like to take you to lines every Sunday, no, every weekday too. If I were daddy, I would be ever so nice and good. So I think this is a nice encapsulation of, first of all, what sort of Hans really wants from the dad and wants from the dad the whole time. That is like take him away, going to travel with dad, going to the train with dad, break some rules with dad. And also sort of him saying, if I were daddy, I'd be ever so nice and good. So like this sort of does contribute to, I guess, Lacan's reading sort of sort of the dad maybe lacking some authority, because in Hans' ideal imagination, the dad isn't strong, powerful, but nice and good. I don't know. I'm not sure about this.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, then he says, well, there was some the dad sort of still on page 75, but on the next page. The dad asks, can you remember how the cow got a calf? And then the Hans says, yes, it came in a cart, and another cow pressed it out of its behind. So like really you have like now the intersecting of sort of the explanations, like where do babies come from? Well, first of all, they birthed out of the ass, and they come in a cart, like they come in a wagon. So like now he has them interlocked.
Yeah, precisely emphasizing what we said, that he still doesn't know where they come from, so he has to have the cart part.
Yeah. Yeah, and then on page 76, he just sort of a bit anxiously asks the dad, Daddy, have you noticed now and then that horses have something black on their mouths? So he's now sort of going back, giving us the connection with the black leather on the horse's mouth, and yeah, just sort of is confirming that again. And like still on 76, but on the next page, the dad says, No, yeah, the dad says, "Can you remember the funeral at Gmunden?" And then he adds, "The first funeral that Hans had seen, he often recalls it, and it is no doubt a screen memory." Okay, already psychoanalytic language here, like he's taking up the screen memory thing of Freud. And I think this is interesting because it just like this remark on the last one, I'm just trying to emphasize why I read the things that I read earlier. Sort of here we have like what is like Hans has the experience of the funeral. He has it vividly. And what was there at the funeral? Most likely a box where someone was laying in. And then at some point Hans asked like, well, where do sort of the are there dead people underneath here in the street? Like, are they laying here under the floor? He asks. And sort of he asks that right after he asked the dad how if when you like if it's easier to do lymph when you've eaten some cheese before. So the question of like being in the box and sort of where do babies come from is also equivalent to like the question of like death again. And I think we went into that the last time, but sort of this is also like where I've taken it from.
Yeah, that's nice. I like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then so now we're kind of back on 78. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's so frustrating. So okay, yeah, sorry, just finding myself. So yeah, we were talking about God doesn't want it.
Mhm.
And yeah, so the bottom of 78 is so frustrating where the dad says, like the bottom 3 lines at the start of 78, "Do you know why you wish for it? It's
Mhm.
because you'd like to be daddy." Hans: "Yes. How does it work?" The
Exactly.
dad:
Like, he's
"How does what
asking.
work?"
Yeah.
Hans: "You say daddies don't have babies, so how does it work, my wanting to be a daddy?" And
Then he
the
just tells him
dad's
some shit afterwards. Yeah.
the dad is just, I think, focused on the
So
Oedipus
oblivious.
complex. Yeah. He's focused on the trying to tease out the desire for the mother, whereas Hans really is just asking about sex. And
Yeah.
because the dad just says, an Oedipal interpretation. He says, "You'd like to be daddy and married to mummy. You'd like to be as big as me and have a moustache, and you'd like mummy to have a baby." And I do, I am in agreement with this and the Freud stuff and the Oedipal stuff, but yeah, this is going further. Like he's asking just genuine questions so that he can escape from this. He just needs
Mhm.
to know what is the role of the father so that he can maybe take on that role later,
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is what I read here too. I just wrote down again, no answer. This is sort of now Hans really like asked for the third or fourth time, like what is it sort of that daddies have to do with children? Because like the dad says, well, um, he says, you want to be daddy, you want to have a baby with mommy, and then he's like, okay, but like nobody ever told me like what the dad's role is. Like, so what is the dad's role? And then he again sort of makes this interpretation line with Freud of like an Oedipal an Oedipal aggression situation from Hans towards the dad, which just sort of doesn't fully, it's just one side of the coin, and Freud and the dad sort of miss the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. Although Freud does say later on.
Freud catches it, but sort of misinterprets it. Like he says, like he doesn't emphasize that much the question of sort of, it's not a genuine part of the Oedipal question to Freud. Like the Oedipal question is about the castration of the penis or the whittler. And it's not so much about the question of where do babies come from, but I think this is sort of where I just think that Lacan adds something very important there, because sort of in my reading, the question of where do babies come from is the question about the desire of the other. And in Lacan, castration is always the castration of the other and not just the child or the subject. So it is, yeah. And if you sort of neglect that side, I think you'll have an incomplete picture of castration.
This is nice. Keep bringing this in if you can. So actually it's really hard to stitch together the question of where do babies come from with the other's desire. I don't think I'm quite there.
I think sort of the other's desire in this sense, in this case, is the question that sort of just Hans is asking, like, in a sense, what is the condition for me being here? Like being, if the question of sort of the other's desire, if we say it in more Lacanian terms, is sort of you're confronted with enigmatic and alternating signifiers that carry an alterity to you. And this is one part of sort of the desire of the other. And sort of when the subject is confronted with this symbolic, what's the Lacanian, what you think, the symbolic field?
The symbolic, register? Dimension?
Yeah, the symbolic, let's just call it the symbolic field of language. Then sort of it is the confrontation with sort of this difference to you, with you having a name before you were even born. And this is sort of what we find directly sort of in this questioning of Hans, when Freud makes this interpretation or tells him at the beginning, I knew that there would be coming a Hans that would be fond of his mom and sort of be aggressive towards his dad or something. Sort of all of this is super symbolic in the sense of like, I sort of questioning where was I before I was here? Sort of that is questioning your symbolic existence in the world. That is questioning your name. Your name is your symbolic existence. And where did you get that name from? You got it from the other, from the locus of speech.
Okay, yeah. That's really good. It is just such a deep question. You can see why it is quite confusing, and a child is having to figure this out. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do think that is important, and why it is nice for you when you like bring in the death aspect. Children are very aware of death, very scared of death. So yeah, like that, there is a deeper thing than just Oedipus, and it does all kind of relate as well. So it's.
And so this is the one side of it, and the other side of the desire of the other is the actual desire of your parents also. Like sort of what is it that mommy wants beyond me? This is also a question about the other's desire. And this is also sort of what Hans is, I guess, this, at least what Lacan is telling us, is sort of you have the sort of luring game, the imaginary game with the mom, and sort of at some point this game gets broken, like, because there's a stirring in Hans' sort of own jouissance. There is the other child that is in competition with him for the mom's desire, and there's also sort of this, maybe at some point, just like kids stumble upon this awareness that the desire of the mother is not just focused on them solely, but also focused on other things. And then sort of, they start to question, what is it? And at first they start to question it. What is it in order for me to be it? And then at some point, there comes the requilting of this outward desire of the mother that sort of is reconfigured by the name of the father, by parental authority. That sort of where sort of you change register, in a sense. You change register from the imaginary to the symbolic, in taking up sort of the lacking signifier of the dad, sort of that is the phallus. that gives you sort of this intermission time, and it gives you sort of sort of the I can't the I can't have it now, I can't be it now. Only sort of an adult sort of can have it or be it, and sort of then you have this structure of like finding a substitute for what you're barred from, what you're not able to get, and sort of this is, I guess, sort of in the Freudian sense, normal Oedipal development. And sort of we see sort of why Lacan is saying that sort of for Hans, this development is problematic, because in order to sort of change register, there needs to be the register you change towards need to somewhat be made explicit. And here it's not made explicit. Like you have sort of the capacities of the paternal or male register are unknown to Hans.
Yeah, so how can you delay it? How can you take on this role later on when he doesn't really know it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really, really nice explanation. And it's really nice to be reminded of how Lacan takes it further, because all that Freud really says is very simple and nice, and I think it does feed into what you're saying. And I think Lacan goes off it because Freud talks about the desire for the mother, you repress it, and then ultimately you like sublimate it into a new aim. So it's kind of similar.
Mm-hmm.
In a footnote, he says, whilst Hans is doing all this questioning, at the same time, he's like learning to play musical instruments, and maybe like sublimating it in that way. And he goes on to be like an opera manager.
Ah.
Yeah. Like, I don't think I'm selling it very well, but yeah. So I think that it kind of fits together a little bit, but I think Lacan just takes it further, like less of this kind of building block way. Yeah.
Like sort of, I guess, sort of this is Freud's return to I was going to say Freud's return to Lacan. Lacan's return to Freud in sort of making explicit what he thinks is already implicit in Freud, but oftentimes sort of, just maybe translating it into the new structure of like language also. And just at some points, picking up things that Freud said that sort of in Lacan's sense make sense in Freud's overall picture, but sort of aren't fully integrated by Freud himself. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and it does make sense. You were starting out, this was a huge idea at the time. So, and Lacan is extremely hard to understand. Like it is great. I feel like, you could argue some of the stuff is implicit, but it makes sense that they happened at the times that they did. Can I just highlight this one bit that just on 79 where Hans is kind of contradicting himself. So his dad is asking him, why do you always imagine your children being with you? Why are you always imagining these children coming to be with you? And kind of at the bottom, Hans says, like, why are you asking me this? Hans says in italics, because I should so like to have children, but I don't ever want it. I shouldn't like to have them. And I mean, you were talking about contradictions earlier. I think I like the footnote
that Freud gives.
Only because it returns to probably my favorite thing that Hans says. But yeah, Freud says the startling contradiction was one between fantasy and reality, between wishing and having. And Hans made that distinction. I don't have any interpretations of what's going on here, but
I think Freud's interpretation or Freud's note here is good. I think another way of reading this would be that this is a child speaking, and therefore sort of we can maybe say that he's again talking about his mom there also, like sort of I should like to have them. I don't ever want it. I shouldn't like to have them. Sort of that sort of the first part relates to Hans, and the second part relates again to he's just switching this to his mom, like saying, I want to have children, but my mom shouldn't have children. And instead of saying I want, she shouldn't, it means he says, I want it, I shouldn't want it. This would be one interpretation. I think Freud's interpretation is actually quite good here. Also, that it's the distinction between wishing and having, or the distinction between fantasy and reality, that sort of Hans knows he can't really have children, but sort of in his fantasy he does have children. He wants, yeah. So I think actually that works fine.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, and then Lodi comes in.
Yeah, that's funny again.
So the sausage child,
Yeah.
who looks like his. So yes, this is his imaginary friend, imaginary child,
Yeah.
imaginary child, who doesn't actually exist, is not based on anyone, that he names Lodi, and when he describes her, he looks like his mum, black hair, black eyes.
This is what the dad says. I
Yeah.
think the black hair, black eyes more relate to what Hans has been talking the whole time, like blackness in the sense of the black garment. Black garment? The black horse
Harness,
harness. What is garment? Is that underwear?
any clothing.
Oh, okay. Then was okay. Nice that I told myself and question again. Yeah, so I think, I mean, that could be also again a valid interpretation here of saying, well, he's making this imaginary child in the image of his mom. I just think he's making it, the imaginary child, more in the image of the shit that had been eaten before. So Lodi, as sort of Freud or the dad tells us, is a sausage. All the other children are real children he plays with, but sort of this particular child is completely made up, and is, yeah, again, I think to me sort of connects the eating and shitting thing, like, because here you have the blackness of the mouthpiece, which he also then connects to shit, like he says shit is black or white, and sort of, yeah, he has his little child there that sort of he made after rather than making after the image of the mom, making after the image of what he knows the baby can be like, and what he knows sort of a baby can be like is kind of, it gets into the stomach, probably by being eaten.
Because it's a sausage, yeah.
Yeah. And then being shed out again and looking like a sausage again.
Yeah, it's true actually. He does, even in this conversation. Yeah, the dad says, doesn't a Saphalodi look like a lymph? Hans, yes. Or does lymph look like Hans? Black. So yeah, maybe that's why it's black. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then here at page 81 on the second page, the dad asks, when you sat on the chamber and the lymph came, did you think to yourself you were having a baby? And Hans says, yes, even at the street. In German it's more clear, I don't know, it's written like this, even at the street and here as well. Yeah, sort of this is really now we see Hans as sort of fully connected the question of sort of baby to shitting, and now also connects it to the horse cart in the street. He did that before. I just saw it as confirmation again. Yeah, and then that is, when the bus horse fell down, the bus looked like a baby box, and when the black horse fell down, it was just like, and Hans concludes, like having a baby. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all coming together.
Yeah. And then I think
he's doing all of the work though, really.
Yeah, Hans is doing a lot of the work, but with the help of the dad.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so as we don't have that much time left, I do want to get into sort of the last thing we find sort of on April 30th, second page of 82. The dad tells again to Hans, "You know quite well a boy can't have any children." And Hans says, "I know. I was their mommy before. Now I'm their daddy." And the dad says, "And who's the children's mommy?" Hans says, "Why, mommy? And you're their granddaddy." And then sort of Hans says, "Yes, that's what I'd like." And then my line's grandmommy, my mother will be their granny. Okay, so this is, I think, a crucial distinction between Freud and Lacan, because Freud and the dad sort of read this as sort of the dissolution of the Oedipus complex, of like giving the dad a nice place as sort of, he no longer sort of wants to kill the dad. He doesn't want the dad to die. He just like marries him imaginarily to his own mother, and like he, as Hans, then marries the mom. So here you have a nice sort of dissolution of the contradiction sort of that Hans was before, in that he sort of hated the dad and loved the dad, basically, and wanted to be with the mommy. Lacan, on the other hand, tells us, well, no, this is way too fast. Like, this is not what's happening here. We don't really see something fundamentally changing in the way Hans rearranges or relates to his situation to his parents. He says, what only happens here is a redoubling of the mom. Sort of, you have the redoubling of the mom with the grandma. And what I sort of think, or like how I want to read or interpret this, what Lacan is saying, is that you have sort of, instead of really metaphorizing the situation, that is sort of, like metaphorizing in this sense means the paternal requilting of the mother's desire, as sort of we said before. You have just
paternal requilting, yeah.
You have just a transposing of the situation. You have sort of, you just like everything, that the problem sort of only moves one generation up.
Yeah.
That is, the dad marries the grandma, Hans marries the mother, and what does Hans have now? He has children like himself. Like, he is one step now removed from being in the grips of the other's desire, in the grip sort of well, his mom. And sort of now it is the children, his imaginary children, that are in the situation of, in the phobic situation for him, in the anxiety situation. And sort of he now is more like identified with the mother's position of like, now it's not him sort of that is the child, but now he is sort of the parent or the mom. And he says like, well, I will have the children every day in my bed. Like I couldn't be. And sort of in this sense, I read sort of the redoubling of the situation, because sort of it's not really. I think this is a bit stupid from me, but sort of I sometimes think of metonymy as reform and metaphor as sort of revolution. So reform is just an incremental change, revolution is a fundamental change. And what we see here is more a incremental change, a redoubling of a situation rather than a complete revolution of the situation. Yeah, sort of this is how I would like to read this redoubling that sort of Lacan gives us quite enigmatically at the end of Seminar 4. Yeah, and sort of just the last thing. In the postscript now, we've looked at two two remarks from the postscript. This is page 85.
Yeah, you let me see. Oh, okay, 85, yes.
It's
oh yeah, I do have it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. This is remark 6. And sort of this is at the end, the dad.
Oh, I've started this, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. I've like
at the end, sort of the dad sort of remarking something when sort of the whole thing is already completed. The dad remarks, an unsolved residue remains behind. For Hans keeps cudgeling his brain to discover what a father has to do with his child, since it is the mother who brings the child into the world. This can be seen from this question as, for instance, I belong to you. Too, don't I? Meaning not only to his mother. It is not clear to him in what way he belongs to me. On the other hand, I have no direct evidence of his having, as you suppose, overheard his parents in the act of intercourse. Okay, whatever. The second part is a bit irrelevant. Maybe it's not. I just think sort of this is really like, him putting the truth here sort of in the footnote at the end. And sort of this is really sort of, I think sort of this is sort of just how I sort of in the end understand what Lacan is saying at the end of Seminar 4, and how sort of Hans quite creatively sort of deals with the situation where there's just a gap in the understanding, which he like very explicitly asks for a couple of times. It's not given to him. Okay, what does he do? He, instead of sort of being able to really explain sort of what's going on, he makes it a chicken and egg situation. Like, it's like, you have grandma and dad sort of as the chicken, then the mom and him as the egg, and he again like gets a chicken as imaginary children. So like he works with what he's got, what he found. This is what I have to say.
I think this is a great explanation. If he literally said, instead of saying redoubling of the mother, if you just say redoubling of the problem, it makes more sense to me. Like it's the minute you explain it's so much clearer. And it is true, like, yeah, sure, father, fine, Hans, fine, but what about Hans' children? They are just now in the exact same problem. It's interesting because I felt like Lacan was saying, the phallus is passed on to the children and like you live through them. But to me, in this scenario, I don't know if the children hold the phallus. They definitely hold the anxiety. Maybe I'm not understanding the difference in the terms, but yeah, it is true. It's not a solution. It's interesting you talk about reform and revolution. Like, I don't know, this guy, philosopher Kuhn, talks about scientific revolutions. And like, it does sound, like Hans, this intermediate, working away. There needs to be a big crisis, and he's moved the crisis away from him. So there will be no revolution. But it is really nice the way you link it to the fact that he doesn't have much choice. It is a one-sided solution because he doesn't know about the other side. For me, it came to me, how was this problem sorted out for me? But obviously there are so many explanations, but I really remember holding on to being told, I guess, about genetics. And I knew that I was half of my dad. And I guess like sperm and egg had been told to me. I don't remember that part, but I just remember the genetics part. I really held on to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a bad sort of explanation, right? This is kind of neurotic Oedipal explanation of sort of what's going on.
What do you mean?
I mean, sort of it's I don't know how you just meant it. I don't know if you just meant sort of it is a kind of a chicken or the egg explanation, but to me it sounds like sort of there is a more like a coming together of like two principles which I think is a more neurotic explanation of sexual difference.
For Hans?
For you.
Say more.
Because you just said like you make sense of it like in a genetic way, like sort of you like having sort of half your genes from your dad. That sort of makes a, I'm half mom, half dad. Whereas sort of for Hans, he's in a certain sense not half dad.
Yeah.
He's positioned himself imaginarily in the father's shoes without really incorporating something from the father. It's not incorporated. He's only like the father, not as the father.
Yeah, because he should have carved his own path as a father with a like new set. Yeah. I think you explained it really well. But okay, so Freud, yes, finishes there. And it is a clever solution. Does Lacan end there as well? Or does Lacan take the plumber replacing his behind as the...
Oh, right. We left something out, right? What is it?
The thing is, does that already come up like... no, maybe not, because there's two plumber fantasies. So one with the boring and the stomach, but then does it come? Yeah, it comes up again. It does come up again. So maybe I guess it will come up later.
No, it does come up. We didn't talk about it. It is actually quite relevant. It is the plumber that comes and takes up his behind and takes up his whittler, and it's interesting because here this is on page 84, 2nd of May, and Hans says, the plumber came and first he took away my behind with a pair of pincers and then gave me another, then the same with my whittler. He said, let me see your behind. And I have turned around and then he took it away. And then he said, let me see your whittler. This is sort of interesting in that regards because Hans sort of previously always was like, well, it can only ever be half seen. I know it's there. No, actually, no, it's not there. And sort of here you have like, or like he says, well, I don't want to be looked at, or he says like the act of when the baby is brought, like it cannot be seen. And here sort of, you have this authority figure, the plumber, coming and unscrewing the whittler and the behind and looking at them directly. And again, sort of, it is about shitting and whittling here. Like it's about the ass and the whittler, like peeing and shitting. And we saw that in the very beginning where like Hans said, where the mom threatened him with castration of his whittler, and he said, well, then I just whittle out of my ass. You see how it's really, this is again sort of here, maybe it needs to happen 2 times. It wouldn't just be enough for him to lose the phallus, lose the penis. He also needs to lose the butt, because the butt is sort of at once the reservoir sort of for the penis when he says like, well, I just like move to the other thing, and also sort of it is like, so this time I left this sort of kind of out, but sort of it's making things mediatable, right? And the sort of the ass needs to be as mediatable as the phallus needs to be. Like it's not just Hans is here, not just attached to something that keeps on growing with him, but is unmovable. It's something now sort of first was the bath that became detachable, and now sort of here we have sort of whittler and as becoming and retachable in a sense. And I think this is also part of why sort of we needed this whole process, because just sort of having a certain distance to the phallus is necessary in order for it to work. Like the phallus needs to be veiled in order for it to work. If it's just right there, it's just a stupid thing. There needs to be some distance to it, so you can fill it up with fantasy. Yeah, so this is kind of, I think, what we see here, like Hans gaining a certain distance to his organs.
Okay, but before we maybe continue down that road, because I think that, yeah, that is like what Lacan is saying. It is interesting that both are here. So he doesn't know the existence of the vagina. And to me, this is kind of like both the male and female roles. He's still not really figured it all out. And so he has both. Like, he knows the whittler has something to do with sex, and then the baby comes out of the arse. And it's weird that he has both. You know, he has not taken on one or the other.
Yeah, that's also, I think that's a fair reading.
You know, like he knows that growth is involved of like the whittler to then be an adult. Maybe the same applies to the arse. But now they're both replaceable. I don't know. There is some distance they can grow. I don't know. But yeah, I think, yeah, we just shouldn't let go of the fact that both things are there. It's interesting that he says it straight away on the off. If you cut off my whittler, then at least I have this. It's kind of a little bit almost disappointing how nothing really changes, but it does change.
I mean, his phobia does go away. His phobia does go away. So
yes,
some solution is there. But I agree, and Lacan definitely agrees with you here, sort of that this is a not fully satisfying solution.
Yeah, and maybe this is why he's okay, because he's just really sitting on the fence. All the options are open to him. Because he has both, it seems. It would have been nicer if he did know more about the, you know, paternal position, but I guess he figures that out later. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting.
What is your interest here in sort of it being both? Is it like actually sort of him being in possession of like male and female aspects, and sort of him not really sort of fully committing to one of them? Is that sort of what you're interested in here? Because sort of my reading sort of it is sort of these are the two questions for Hans that plague him throughout this whole text. That is sort of the ass is connected to childbirth, and the whittler is, well, it's the whittler. He's super interested in it from the beginning, and like that's how he explained the world to him in this manner, in this guise, like, you know, animate objects, like it's a real, the whittler is a question. Like he questions with the whittler, and he questions where do babies come from, and then sort of finds the solution, well, they come out of the butt. So this sort of in this respect, sort of it makes sense to me that sort of both need to be castrated, both need to become mediatable, because those are the two questions sort of that he's asking. But I think you saw something a bit different there.
I don't know, it's so hard. Sorry, because I quite like what you've just said. And so now I'm thinking along your lines, and I'm just thinking how frustrating it actually must have been for him, because I think it's like somatically, bodily, he knows the whittler's important, like it coming alive, he knows it's involved in sex, and he doesn't understand how. And I just can't imagine how frustrating that must be to know, like, you know, it's like it's this instinctual knowledge, but no one's given him the logical part. Yeah, it's interesting to say they have to be mediatable. Definitely he has to put it down. He has to be satisfied with some kind of answer to the question so we can just move on and have a nice latency period. But I just think he has to, kind of keep his options open because he still doesn't completely know the mechanics of it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the dad kind of says that, right? He says, well, Hans keeps pondering about what the dad's role is. Like, sort of that kind of is unresolved. I mean, that speaks to what you just said.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's so clever. I really do.
Yeah, this is a really smart child.
Yeah, yeah. And I think he did go on to be, it seemed quite successful. So, okay, yeah. I think this is a much better understanding than I had for sure.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, damn. Um, yeah, I'm sad that we're done.
Yeah. No, this was a ride. I
I never